So here's a question for how does a really complex, kind of weird psychological theory from the early 1900s become the title of one of the biggest rock albums ever made? It's a pretty wild story, and today we're going to follow the thread that connects a famous psychoanalyst, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, and, yeah, the band Police. Okay, so let's set the scene. It's 1983 and the Police are on top of the world. I mean, they were everywhere. They weren't just a band. They were pretty much the band spearheading this massive wave of British music that just completely conquered the charts, especially in America. And their last album, Synchronicity, was an absolute monster. Get this, it stayed at #1 on the US Billboard chart for 17 weeks. Not even consecutive weeks, just 17 weeks in total. It sold millions and millions of copies. It was a true cultural phenomenon. But, for all that success, the album's title was, well, it was a bit of a head-scratcher for most people. Sting, the band's frontman, actually borrowed it from the work of the Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung. So what was this idea he found so fascinating? What in the world is synchronicity? All right, let's try and solve this mystery. And to do that, we have to step away from the roaring crowds of the rock stadiums and go all the way back to the quiet, thoughtful world of early 20th century Switzerland. So at its heart, Jung called synchronicity an acausal connecting principle. Whoa! Okay, what does that mean? Well, in simpler terms, it's when things happen that feel deeply connected, really meaningful, but there's no logical reason for them to be. It's not just a coincidence, it's a coincidence that gives you goosebumps, that feels like it means something. Now, Jung was smart. He knew this idea was a little out there, hard to pin down. So he had this killer story from his own practice that he used to explain it. It's an amazing example of a moment that completely changed things for one of his patients. It's famously called the story of the Golden Scarab. Okay, so here's how it went. Jung was working with this woman who was super intellectual, very rational. You know the type? If you can't prove it with logic, it's not real. She was telling him about a dream she had where someone gave her a golden scarab beetle. And right at the moment, she's describing the scarab from her dream. Jung hears this little tapping sound on the window pane behind him. He turns around, opens the window, and in flies a beetle, the closest thing you can get to a scarab in that part of the world. So Jung catches the beetle in his hand, walks over to his patient and says, "Here is your scarab." Can you even imagine this completely impossible moment? This coincidence that was so deeply meaningful, it just shattered her hyper-rational view of the world. It was the breakthrough they needed. But here's where it gets even stranger. For Jung, this idea wasn't just about psychology. He thought he saw hints of this same principle, this acausal connection in the most cutting-edge, mind-bending science of quantum physics. You gotta remember, the early 20th century was just a wild time for science. You had Einstein's relativity, you had quantum mechanics, and these new ideas were basically turning the old predictable clockwork model of the universe completely on its head. Jung was totally fascinated by this and saw a link between the bizarre world of subatomic particles and the strange connections he was seeing in the human mind. And this fascination led to one of the most incredible and unlikely partnerships you can imagine. Wolfgang Pauli. This guy was a giant of physics, a Nobel laureate. He was also famous for being brutally critical of any idea he thought was sloppy. But in the 1930s, he went through a major personal crisis and started seeing Jung as a patient. He and that doctor-patient relationship blossomed into this amazing decades-long friendship where they co-published a book exploring this very idea of synchronicity. Just to give you a sense of who Pauli was, this was his legendary insult for a bad idea. He was a hardcore realist. So the fact that this guy of all people got so deeply invested in Jung's concept of synchronicity, which, let's be honest, sounds pretty unscientific on the surface, that's what makes this whole story so fascinating. So what was the connection? What did a physicist like Pauli see in it? Well, the new physics was describing things like quantum entanglement. This idea that two particles could be linked no matter how far apart they were. What happened to one would instantly affect the other. Einstein famously called it spooky action at a distance. It justified normal cause and effect. And for Pauli and Jung, this raised a huge question. If the very building blocks of our reality are connected in these weird non-local ways, well, why couldn't our minds and the world around us be connected in a similar way, too? And right there, that unlikely team-up between physics and psychology gets us to the heart of the matter. It brings us to this central debate, the big question that fascinated both of them, and honestly still fascinates us today. When we experience one of these meaningful coincidences, is it just in our heads, or are we actually getting a glimpse of some hidden order to the universe? Yeah, it's really important to draw a line here. A coincidence is just stuff happening. You and your friend accidentally wear the same shirt to a party, but synchronicity is when that coincidence hits you with this profound feeling of meaning. It's the scarab beetle showing up at the exact moment the patient is talking about it. That's the difference. And this leads to the huge debate. Is this whole synchronicity thing just a psychological quirk? Is it just our brains doing what they do best, finding patterns and telling stories? And sometimes we just project meaning onto events that are totally random, or is it something more? Is it a moment where we actually peek behind the curtain and see a real, objective, meaningful connection in the world? Are we creating the meaning, or are we discovering it? So one side of the argument says, look, we are meaning makers. Our brains are wired to find patterns. It helped us survive. And sometimes that pattern finder goes a little haywire. We see faces in the clouds. We see omens and spilled coffee. And we see deep connections and random coincidences. It's a feature of our minds, not a feature of the universe itself. But the Jungian idea is way more radical. It says we are meaning discoverers. The meaning isn't something we're making up in our heads. It's actually out there, woven into the fabric of reality. And these synchronistic events are just these incredible rare moments where we're able to perceive that pattern that's already there. And that right there, that tension, is why this whole concept was the absolute perfect theme for the Police in 1983. Because Sting was a huge reader. He was totally immersed in this stuff at the time, and the band itself was living through its own massive paradox. They were hitting this unbelievable peak of global success at the very same moment that they were completely, totally falling apart. I mean, the recording sessions for the album Synchronicity are legendary for how awful they were. The band members hated each other so much by that point that they were literally recording their parts in separate rooms just to avoid each other. Their producer, Hugh Padgham, said it was just a horrible, tense atmosphere all the time. So here's the paradox. Right out of all this fighting, this chaos, this personal disintegration, came their most popular, their most ambitious, and their most successful album ever. How do those two things even happen at the same time? It was a real-life synchronicity, total personal dysfunction, and absolute peak professional success, meaningfully connected. And you can hear this idea all over the lyrics. The song Synchronicity 2 literally connects the quiet misery of a guy in the suburbs with the Loch Ness monster rising from the depths. King of Pain is just this list of random, sad images, a black spot on the sun, a dead salmon in a stream that all add up to this one powerful feeling. And hey, even every breath you take is a kind of synchronicity. Sting wrote a really dark, creepy song about surveillance, and millions of people heard it and meaningfully connected with it as the most beautiful love song ever written. So there you have it. We went from a psychoanalyst's office in Switzerland to a physicist's blackboard, and all the way to a legendary rock album. And all of them are wrestling with the same single tantalizing idea, an idea that really makes you question how the world actually works. And in the end, it leaves us with the same big question that fascinated Jung, Pauli, and Sting. Are all those meaningful connections in your life just stories you're telling yourself to make sense of a chaotic, random world? Or are they little clues, little hints of a deeper, hidden reality where maybe, just maybe, everything really is connected? The answer, just like the idea itself, is still a beautiful mystery.